exactly your companies do within the connected car world. I think, Don, it's probably a little bit obvious what Ford is doing in that area, but if you could give me a quick, give the audience a quick overview of what your role is at Ford in this regard and what Ford's role within the world of the connected car is.
Sure. So hopefully everyone can hear me. I lead connected vehicle and services for Ford, and when we talk about connectivity, we talk about it in three facets, and I think actually we're going to touch on all three of those today, but brought in, built in, and beamed in, and across all of those, unifying our efforts within Ford, primarily around satisfying our customers, delivering great customer experiences, but also in terms of improving the quality of our products, improving the quality of our services, and then finally enhancing the safety of our customers as well. Included within that, obviously, is Sync, and the great things that we're doing there in terms of connecting with broad-end devices and leveraging the content computing capability and the media that's on that device and bringing it into the vehicle, enabling you to interact with it seamlessly, painlessly, and safely, eyes on the road and hands on the wheel. So excited to talk about the things that we're doing at Ford and talking prospectively about some things that may come in the future.
Great. And Tim, of course, GM's got OnStar, which is one of the best-known car connectivity platforms out there. Can you give us a bit of an overview of your role there and what GM's doing in the connected car world?
Sure, Tim. As Tim mentioned, I'm the CTO for Global Connected Customer Experience at GM. And in that role, I'm really responsible for the engineering, the technology, strategy, and visioning, and then the engineering of the connected ecosystem, whether it's embedded or brought in. And much like what Don was just mentioning, we've got a set of brands out there in the terms of our vehicle brands, with our brands not only here in North America but around the world, and then OnStar, of course, which has been our core embedded connectivity brand that's been in place for 18 plus years. We're now layering on a number of new things onto that, and we're here talking about 4G LTE, which we were here last year introducing, and of course we've now launched that on over 30 vehicles here in North America and more coming. Now we're taking that really to the next level, talking about new services and new features that we can build on that, whether it's brought-in devices into the car, remote access of the vehicle, and of course building on our great strategy of safety, security, peace of mind that we've had for all these years. In addition to that, connected infotainment is a key piece of what we do, and so making sure that we're understanding where that technology is going and the roadmaps behind that, and then implementing that is really what we're about. And we do that for the company globally across all of our brands. So.
Thank you. Now, Jeff, I think a lot of people in the room probably think of Continental as a tire company. Can you give us a little bit more of an overview of how the company fits into the connected car world?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, tires is obviously a very big part of our business, but the other big part of our business is probably one of the fastest growing areas is in the area of the automotive space, both in powertrain, in chassis, and as well as what we call interior, but it's really electronics. And that's really the space that fits very well to this panel. But as we look at connectivity and we look at the interior electronics, we look at what we can do with that connection. And that connection obviously fits very well to much of what we talk about with multimedia and telematics. But really what it fits to is an entire experience in the car. It's fuel efficiency, it's dynamic, updated maps, eHorizon maps that come in and what you can do with that information. And it's also a huge potential for automated driving. The more information you can get into and out of the car, the better the driving experience can be, safer, more comfortable, and more efficient.
And Tom, for Panasonic, you guys are in a lot of cars on the road right now, even though the Panasonic brand may not be front and center. Can you give us an overview of Panasonic's role in the connected car world?
Yeah, like Jeff, we're mostly known as a TV company, but actually our automotive business is our fastest growing part of our business. So as more consumer electronics into the car, because some of that heritage we have and bring it into the car. The most obvious place is the infotainment space, where we're the global leader in that, because we're really bringing consumer experiences into the vehicle. And that's really the core part of our business. Those are some other things, audio solutions, safety solutions, and some of those things that drive really help the goal of
We have a replacement mic for you, sir. So we're getting some interesting static noises. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
All right, I don't know. Did they hear everything?
Did you hear everything? No. Do you mind doing that again, Tom?
Can you hear now better?
Yeah.
All right. So I mentioned the fact that Panasonic Automotive is primarily driven around the core infotainment business, but we have a lot of other things, and we spend a lot of time on that really integration of the consumer experience based on our background in the consumer electronics space. And now as more and more consumer electronics come to the vehicle, we've integrated that in. And our really focus is bringing entertainment into the vehicle with the ability to inform and connect in a very safe way.
Thank you. Everybody get that one that time? Okay. Good. All right. So first we're going to start by talking about connectivity to the car. Obviously, this entire panel is going to relate to connectivity in the car and to the car in some way or another. But specifically services that are enabled outside of the car necessarily by this sort of connectivity. Now, in the picture on the slide here, we've got a picture of some OnStar functionality that you can do through an app. Tim, what kind of functionality are you guys bringing to current production cars thanks to constant connectivity within your cars, and what sort of things will more bandwidth enable in this regard?
Sure. So we've been actually, it's interesting you've got that picture up there. I didn't know you were going to show that, but that's actually a good lead-in, because with the embedded connection that we've got in our vehicles, and it's really ubiquitous, frankly, across our vehicle fleet in North America certainly, and starting to go in that direction in other places in the world, we have now really enabled with the core plumbing. We've enabled the vehicle to be connected. And the kind of services that we've delivered historically around safety and security are still there. But in the case of the embedded connectivity, we actually keep that enabled. Of course, the customer has to consent to that. But once they've enabled it, they can use that app. That app is free. They can go get it from iTunes or Google Play. And it's connected, and they don't have to, frankly, pay for it. It's usable. They can use the key fob. It's been an incredible experience for us to understand. Back in 2013, we thought we were on a high because we had 20 million interactions using the app. We have 1 million active customers now on using that app, unique customers. Last year, we had 43 million interactions. We had 500,000 interactions yesterday. Using that app. So
largely because it's cold in lots of places in the world.
Yeah, so when it gets cold, right? We've clocked when it's cold out, northern climates, over 20,000 remote starts an hour off of the app. And so that's giving people the peace of mind of, hey, you know what? I'm farther from my car than my fob is going to work. I may be in the office and my car's a mile or two away, or whatever. I can unlock it. I can remote start it. I can warm it up before I get there. But on top of all that, what we've also recognized is the kind of information that we now have accessible on this app or through other means is really propelling us in a new direction, because not only can I remote start the vehicle, but I can get diagnostic information. Of course, we have a Wi-Fi hotspot now with 4G. I can manage that Wi-Fi hotspot using this app. And when we start to look at where do we take that to the next level, we've done diagnostics now for roughly 10 plus years, but now we're doing advanced diagnostics by having that constant connection. We have a cadence of data that we can pull from the vehicle and look at trends and be able to predict when something potentially is going to go wrong with a starting, charging, or fuel system. And so for us, that keeps adding to the peace of mind that we've been delivering as OnStar for a long time. So we're pretty excited about it, because it really is going to bring, I think, a whole new layer of functionality that people really never even imagined could be there because of that always-on constant connectivity.
But even so, you don't really need an LTE connection to send a remote start command. Is there something that sort of connectivity will bring to the table that you're not able to do with a 3G connection, for example?
Certainly, you don't need a 4G connection to do it. But with the 4G connection, we recognize that, you know what, we want to put ourselves at the forefront. We're trying to be forward-looking, and we recognize that most of the devices probably in this room have 4G connections on them, right? And so when someone comes into the vehicle, in our case, we have a Wi-Fi node there. They can bring up to 7 devices and connect. We really wanted to bring that really high-end experience, high bandwidth, low latency touch point. And in fact, I've recognized, and in fact, I've used the system personally. I've got a family. We've done some traveling. It's really convenient when you can get into a vehicle and have somebody in the back seat exploring a social media site, or even streaming a video, which is something you can do uniquely with 4G that you really couldn't do with previous generations, especially with multiple devices in the vehicle.
Now, Don, that's a little bit different than the Ford approach, which is primarily bring your own device, connect your device to the car, and the connectivity is largely provided by the device. We've seen different trends and different shifts in direction. Do you continue to foresee that people will bring their own data to the car, or will it be more of a trend of the car will itself be the modem?
We believe that it's going to be all three facets of the means of connectivity, and so Tim's spoken a lot about that built-in connectivity, and we think that's going to grow in terms of importance and presence. And With our own products like the Lincoln MKC, for instance, in our electrified vehicles, we've got that embedded modem capability, and you can expect to see it broaden across Ford's lineup. But our focus initially has been with Sync to accommodate devices that consumers already have and the ways that they'd like to use those devices when they come into the vehicle. Our lives have all begun to revolve around our smartphone, and in fact, it's a global phenomenon. 92% of customers around the world say they want to be connected all the time. And we've seen, for instance, the same thing that happened with PCs, right? We've skipped PCs in places like China, for instance, and gone directly to smart devices because of the computing capability. And with consumers and their lives wrapped around that device, and with the fact that that device and its ability to change quite rapidly, 18 to 24 months, for instance, we think the focus on leveraging the content, the media, the computing capability, the contacts on that device, we think we'll always want to emphasize that as part of what we do and do it in a safe manner. But we do think that embedded connections are going to become more and more important, and we're looking at growing our presence in that area as well. And then, we also focus from an infotainment standpoint on, again, what we call beamed in, so whether that's satellite radio or Wi-Fi that's connected with Sync, for instance, and the ability to update over the air through Wi-Fi. So the answer to your question is we think it's all three facets, and depending on what's important to that customer and depending on what's important by region, for instance, places like India may not be able to afford, unless Jeff can help me, embedded connectivity with a modem, right? And he's done a great job helping us, by the way. But we need to do what's right for the marketplace and what's right for consumers, so it's a combination of all three of those solutions, we think.
Jeff, can you help him, Jeff?
Yeah. We will.
That's good to hear. All right, you heard it here first. But speaking more about a little bit more serious topics in terms of car connectivity when it comes to vehicle and driver safety and that kind of thing, Jeff, obviously there's a lot of data that's going to be required to really bring true smarts to the car when it comes to awareness of its environment and awareness of the situation that it's driving within. What sort of advantages do a higher bandwidth solution provide when you're talking about vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication?
Yeah, I think when you look at 3G to 4G, or if you look at mobile devices versus embedded devices, you're going to need really everything. You need the biggest bandwidth you can get coming into the car. If you look at the demands of the past, they're changing every day in magnifications of 10, 20, 30, where every day we're getting more and more need for data. If you look at the future automated driving cars, we're going to have about 1 gigabyte of data every minute that's available from all the sensorics on the vehicle and all the information you have in the vehicle. So you have a tremendous amount of data in each vehicle. The objective is to get that data in the usable way in the cloud and back down. And that's what we've been working pretty intensively on, a system called Dynamic eHorizon. We've got a partner with HERE, who is providing tremendous map capability, and then IBM, who's our partner with the data analytics in the cloud. And we've now got working demonstrations and real-time data to show the benefit of getting the data from the cars up in the cloud, processing the data, providing it back down to the vehicles to provide not real-time traffic. That's easy, right? It's lane position, it's recognition of signs, it's recognition of where you are, and it's also using everything that's available, not just vehicle to vehicle, but also available in the cloud. You can predict when there's going to be black ice. You can predict when there's going to be a situation that demands the driver's attention. So that bandwidth and that connection is really important. We've also got a relationship with Cisco. And a lot of people say, it's very nice, but when it comes to safety, and that's the number one thing for us is safety. If it's not done safe, you don't do it. And with that safety, you need that reliable connection. And that's why I think the more safety and the more data you need into and out of the vehicle, the more you'll probably see more embedded devices, right? They're a little bit more reliable. So some embedded devices are needed. I think in some applications you can use a mobile device, but you need to have a reliable connection. And with Cisco, we have exactly that. We've got a way now to aggregate signals. You can have the embedded device, you can have the mobile device, you can even have Wi-Fi that's available, public Wi-Fi. You can use each and every one of those signals independently, or you can aggregate to provide the best connection and the best reliable bandwidth coming into the vehicle. So that's kind of the way we see it. And especially when you look at things like automated driving and some of the future with, like I say, this dynamic eHorizon mapping.
And when it comes to providing that reliable data to the car that you really need for safety, how much would you be relying on something like 802.11p, which is the vehicle-to-vehicle communication standard, versus something like a cellular connection or something different?
Well, I think anytime we can get standards, it's going to help all of us. All right. So I won't speak about one standard or another, but I think standards are important if we're really going to take this thing to the next level. If everybody's working on a different protocol, we'll never get to where we need to be. And I think that's, as an industry, people realize that. For us, though, it's about getting collaboration and getting the best solution up in the cloud and processed. And we're looking at a lot of different applications and different ideas on how to do this.
Great. Let's move on to talk about connectivity within the car and the sorts of functionality that you can expect to get not only in the front seat or in the driver's seat, but also in the back seat. We've got a lovely picture of a Ferrari FF with some iPads in the back seat here. So Tom, when it comes to connectivity within the car, obviously every OEM wants more connectivity from their head units. From an OEM standpoint, what are you seeing? What are the demands, and where do you foresee this going over the next, let's say, 5 years when it comes to connectivity? What kind of features will be standard and commonplace in cars in the not too distant future for connectivity?
Yeah, so I think these guys did a good job explaining the fact that there's not going to be one single solution, right? There's going to be multiple ways of accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish in the marketplace. And it's an interesting time because we're not technology limited anymore, right? So now that the pipe exists and the ability to get there, it's a matter of what you do with it. And it's an interesting dynamic in trying to then bring the consumer experience to the vehicle in a way that isn't distracting, right? So really, how do you do that and what do you do? We clearly think that what you need to do is you need to bring it in a more elegant way, and what we say in a more elegant way is the fact that it can't be a tablet in the vehicle, right? It has to be an integrated system that is intuitive so that you're not distracted while trying to do that. So what I think you'll see from ourselves and from the car makers is increasing capability in those units to do things that don't distract you while you're doing it as they bring the functionality in. We're showing today on the floor a streaming-in system, which we acquired about a year and a half ago, a company called Opale. And what we really do with that system is we bring the radio in, but we no longer need the functionality of switching from channel to channel or place to place. The system intuitively understands your needs, and if it's sports, weather, traffic, entertainment, whatever it is, it will be able to then bring that to you the way you want it in a very personal way. And also it'll bring it to you without you having to take your eyes off the road and be able to move channels and all of that. And we think as this functionality comes, the complication behind that is you have too many things that you're working on. So we're trying to take some of those things away. And I think as you see conductivity and that ability to personalize and make it more intuitive are really the things that are going to make a difference.
All these things require data, of course, and unfortunately data is not free. So I ask this question pretty much every year at CES, and it's interesting to watch the different answers. But Tim, I guess, are consumers happy to pay for a data plan for their car? Are they willing to pay for a data plan for their car?
I think the answer to that, frankly, is still unfolding for us as to what the actual numbers are going to be. Mm-hmm. But clearly, people are very excited about using data in the car. And the thought that we had going into this was the way to really structure how we interact with the customer and have the conversation is really to make sure that we had a range of options, right? And so when you look at, for example, how we do data in terms of data sales, you can get a day pass, right? You can, for $5, you can go and procure data for a Saturday if that's what you're looking for. Or, we have a relationship, of course, with AT&T as a partner, and if you've bought a 30 gig data plan from them, you can add your car to the data plan just like a tablet or a smartphone and consume the data from that bucket of bytes that you bought. So, and we've got a number of plans in between all of that to recognize the fact that people have different lifestyles, different use scenarios. We know people are going to tend, especially in our case with Wi-Fi, they're going to tend to consume more as you approach the weekends. So we recognize that and try to structure data plans around that. But I think the emphatic answer around that is, if it's structured right, I think people are going to find the use and the value for it, and they're going to buy the data.
And Don, let's just assume that we've got all the bandwidth that we want in the car, one way or another. We've seen how you can stream video, of course, in the car. We've seen how you can do, connected car, things like that. What other things do you envision coming to the car that's going to be enabled by this overwhelming amount of bandwidth that hopefully we'll have in the very near future?
Yeah, I mean, and not being flippant with this, the short answer is I don't know.
Fair enough.
But the broader answer is, and Jeff touched on it, we're going to have the ability to have a broad enough pipe to collect massive amounts of data from the vehicle. And we've got challenges in terms of being able to do that. And first and foremost, and as was emphasized by Mark Fields yesterday in his keynote on smart mobility for Ford, we have to engender and ensure customer trust. And so from a Ford perspective, we need to make sure that customers understand that data that's coming off the vehicle, it's their data. We are not the owners of the data. We are the stewards of the data, which means that we protect it, and that we enhance it, and that with their informed consent, we deliver value to them for it. So I think what's going to happen with this bigger pipe is this ability to collect massive amounts of data. The challenges that we're going to have are some practical ones, right? We can't probably stream all the time, right? And so we're going to have to be smart about what snapshots do you take in terms of vehicle characterization and vehicle performance. The other thing that we've got to be very, very careful of is security. Customers want to be sure that we're handling that in an appropriate way, preventing hacking, preventing cyber attacks. And so there's going to be a lot of work necessary to make sure that as we're collecting this data, that we're doing it safely and securely, and that we can protect the data both in the accessing of it as well as in the storage of it. But what I'm happy about is that we're going to be able to work with a number of developers, like we have with our AppLink partners, for instance, to expose amounts of this data, expose different types of data, and together create solutions and create customer experiences that we can't even dream of today. If you thought about, and if we had a panel back in 1993, and we had the World Wide Web, and we had Mark Andreessen up here, and he said, what do you think are the things that are going to happen with the internet? He wouldn't have been able to tell you the things that we're exploring now, right? Because we've got this network, because we've got this connection, because we've got access to the data.
Let's talk about security a bit. Can you really guarantee security of a car? I mean, in the past we've seen any sort of systems within the car were really wholly disparate between the ECU and the sort of reliant systems that you needed to drive the car and the infotainment side of things, the radio, the HVAC controls, that kind of thing. We're seeing more and more of those two come together as we're seeing data feeding from the ECU back into the infotainment systems. How do you provide that level of security to ensure that if you've got a connected car, that someone doesn't just do a DDoS attack on your car and you grind to a screeching halt in the middle of rush hour?
Tim can probably speak much more intelligently about it than I can, but at a basic level, number one, you plan around enhancing security, and you plan around the threat surfaces that are there, what are the possible attack profiles. You probe, you hire people to test you and to make sure that you've got the appropriate controls in place. In certain cases, you do literal firewalls between sensitive control modules and infotainment modules, for instance. And you do things like encryption and just making sure that the signatures of what you're downloading make sense to the modules that are getting them. But you have to recognize the threat surface and then plan against every possible attack of the threat surface. And it's an ongoing challenge, an ongoing battle, and it's something that I think we're all going to have to work on together.
And I believe Don said you could do a better job.
I would just add, I think that was a great answer. I think I would just add that it is an industry. It is an industry problem. You know, we compete at a lot of levels, but that's one of those areas where you need to really understand what's going on and collaborate.
And is there collaboration going on in that regard?
I think it's beginning. It's interesting because it happens in different circles than what automakers maybe traditionally have participated in. But
that's kind of what we found when we looked at who we're going to partner with to bring this information into the vehicle. And I talked about Cisco as a partner and IBM and others, but mainly it's Cisco and IBM in this particular area where they are experts at data security. They're experts at encryption. They're experts at big data integrity. And with their experience and their knowledge, and they've got hundreds of engineers that work exclusively on this. We want to bring this into the auto industry. For each of us to do it independently and each of us work with different partners is not going to make sense. So that's why we said we're not going to do it in-house. We're going to reach out to known experts and do it with a collaboration. And we think it's been a really successful model for us so far. We got a long way to go, right? But cybersecurity has been there forever. We've been embedding cybersecurity thinking in our electronic modules for 20 years. I mean, this concept has been out there. Today, every new module that we develop for any of our customers, cybersecurity is one of the key topics. And it's not just because of the connection, it's because of the knowledge of what these modules can do. They can stop the vehicle, they can steer the vehicle, so that's been a big topic for a long time.
And Tom, is that somewhere that Panasonic has a lot to offer, given that Panasonic's experience within the overall electronics industry is so broad and has had to obviously deal with security in a lot of other areas too?
Yeah, I think to kind of further what these guys have said, it's not a one-trick pony by one of us, right? It's certainly using the expertise that's out there, and the consumer electronics area already does that, right? You have to be partnered with people that are in the industry and experts to be able to deliver those solutions, right? And I think that's what they're saying. Certainly that's what we would say, and that's happened for a long time in the industry. There has to be some level of collaboration. You have to go to the experts. We're not going to be able to do all of it. And clearly, that's why we're all now in Silicon Valley, right? All the auto companies are there. All the suppliers are there. We've been there for a long time in the consumer space, but all of the automakers have joined us out there. And that's really different than it was even 5 years ago. And you have to be on the leading edge. You have to be partnering with these guys. You have to know what's going on with the startup companies as well as the guys that have been embedded out there for a long time.
And what sort of lessons are you learning from startup companies? I mean, I've actually just recently did profiles of a lot of those Silicon Valley R&D centers, which is fascinating. What sort of things are you learning from there that maybe you wouldn't have picked up in Detroit or elsewhere?
I think a couple of aspects. One is the notion of fast prototyping, learning quickly, conducting experiments. And in the case of autos, right, you don't want to conduct experiments across millions of vehicles, and so you've got to have the right kind of profile and context for that experiment. But it's about being willing to take risks, being willing to partner in ways that are different than traditional supplier, vendor, customer relationships. It's thinking differently. It's thinking like a software company. Within a vehicle context, typically what we would do is we'd put a vehicle program team together that would work on designing and developing a vehicle, getting it ready to manufacture it. That process takes anywhere from 2 to 4 years. The vehicle gets launched, and then they go on to the next program, right? In software, it's very, very different. Right, software, you set it up and you release job one, but you're planning continuous feature enhancements going on beyond that. And that's something, candidly, that from an automotive perspective, we need to become accustomed to doing, thinking more like a software company, like a technology company. And I think being able to move fast prototyping, partnering in different ways, thinking about software as an ongoing process, those are some of the things that we're learning.
Yeah, I would just add to that what we've learned, and we have a Silicon Valley office, as I think everyone here does, we recognize that agile development, that fail fast and recover and get on to the next thing, is really it gives you some incredible performance efficiencies, because we see that, for example, back to that mobile app example. When we develop this mobile app, we come up with a new iteration of this every 2 weeks. We write this software in-house. And we don't release each of those, but it gives us a glimpse of that next feature, that fix of that next, whatever the next topic is. And that agile environment really gives us the benefit of being able to see things emerge over time, so you don't have to wait for the typical vehicle development cycle. As Don pointed out, it's kind of the same everywhere, years long. We're talking days or weeks, being able to see progress made, slow incremental progress, but it's towards a goal, and you can see that kind of come to life over time, and it's really powerful.
And will that move to the dashboard as well? I mean, we've seen that kind of evolution affect a lot of industries, from video game systems that receive constant updates. Tesla, of course, has pushed some major updates to its cars. Will that become a fact of life for an everyday car in the near future?
I think it's a given. It's absolutely a given. We'll see that same process play out in infotainment software, in cockpit, other cockpit products. And I think at the end of the day, we have to, as an industry, perform at that level, because frankly, most other products in people's lives are developed that way, right? And that's just an example of what you're going to see. These kind of devices get updates periodically, and we're going to have to find a way as an industry. We have some unique constraints and some unique challenges, but we're going to have to find a way as an industry to elevate our game, so that frankly, our vision of a vehicle is, it used to be you bought a car and it was that way for 10 years, right? Now, in this new world order, you've got the pipe. So there's no excuses anymore for that. You've got this process in place. The vehicle can get better over time, just like a smartphone or a tablet gets better over time.
Yeah, and if you look at a company like Tesla, I mean, they've really explored all of this, right? They got the mindset of we don't have a model year. We have a daily vehicle, right? And they're constantly updating. Everything's over the air. Everything is secure. Some people would question, geez, are their practices the right practices? They don't know automotive, but you know what? They're really pressing the industry to think differently, to think speed, to think exactly fail and recover very quickly. And I think we've learned a lot from our Silicon Valley office. We just started a new business unit, our Intelligent Transportation Systems business unit in Silicon Valley, and we're really trying to explore the possibilities outside of even automotive, because the thinking is different, and we all need to tap into it. And I think we're starting to see big benefits, just if nothing else in the mindset.
Yeah, and just specific point and an example, working with the Panasonic team and Sync 3, we've got the ability to do Wi-Fi updates over the air, and within an automotive context, as Tim was alluding to, very, very different, right? We can't be in a situation, and not to be critical, but we can't be in a situation where release 8.1 didn't quite work, and so just wait till the next release. I mean, it's got to work. There's a different hassle factor, right? If your vehicle's inoperative, then if your smartphone just doesn't quite work the right way for a few hours in the day, right? The other thing is, and again, from a Sync 3 example, that update can spool and cache in the background, and the system is continuing to operate and work while the update is performing, and we're working with most of our module suppliers to have that kind of capability. And then the other thing is when we think about the payloads that might need to be downloaded for a powertrain control module or other modules in the vehicle, we need to really look at differential updates and be able to perfect that. And then, of course, we talked about the security elements that need to go along with all of that as well.
And I think, to your question of what is Silicon Valley teaching us, right? It's really, I think these guys said it, right? It's talking about speed, and it is challenging the status quo of saying, yeah, maybe we can do it. And we were very hardware or technology limited in the past, and a lot of those obstacles have come down, right? These guys have enabled their vehicles to do the things that we need now to get the mismatch of a consumer product life cycle and an automotive life cycle to narrow significantly. And there's a big gap between what the consumer life cycle is of products, look at phones, for instance, or other consumer products, and what the vehicle is. And the fact that you have ownership of the vehicle at a far, far longer period of time, you have even a greater need now that you brought more consumer products. So the enablement of the technology is going to create a whole nother challenge because the user experience is now going to be different. When you told them they couldn't, they didn't ask the question. Now that you enabled them, they're going to continue to ask the harder and harder questions. And I think the Silicon Valley area is the one that asks those hard questions very readily because they aren't the ones that give you the obstacles. They have this infinite way of thinking everything can be accomplished, and they really challenge you to rethink whether the answer should have been yes, or yes, we could have do that, or we can do that how. So the limitations that we've had that have been put in place because we were limited in technology are falling pretty quickly. And really, when we look at this technology, it's fairly, it's very new, right? We haven't had the technology in the vehicle for a long period of time, so we've been able to test it. So we're learning things in the user experience, and that's the thing that we really get out of Silicon Valley is how do you enhance that user experience and use the technology to make sure that it really does the things that the end user needs.
I think one of the big questions is the consumer going to be more understanding when something on the display doesn't work, like they are when their smartphone, you have to reboot it, oh well. Today, if your display fails, it's a big deal in your car. Are they going to, over time, become more comfortable that, you know what, that software update wasn't perfect, and they're going to understand more? It's a big question. We haven't seen that yet, but over time, we'll have to see how that plays out, because that constant update, it's different than what we've experienced.
Personally, I hope that we don't have to become accustomed to that kind of thing, because I don't think it's made our lives easier in the gaming world, and I don't think it will help in the automotive world either. So for the third half of our discussion, I want to talk about the infotainment world. I mean, that's another area that all of you guys have been learning a lot from the Silicon Valley world. And Don, in particular, you just launched Sync 3, and that's an operating system that's obviously very influenced by mobile operating systems in a lot of ways. The look and feel is very similar to a tablet, and obviously you guys did a lot of performance benchmarking against the most popular tablets out there. So why not simply turn to a mobile operating system manufacturer like Apple or Google and simply embrace their solutions and go with that, rather than try to forge your own path?
It may be a bit self-centered, but we think we know some things about the automotive environment that we put into how we design and develop and build, particularly user experience, for instance. And I'll give you just one real small example. So with Sync 3, we are kind of emulating what folks see in a smartphone or a tablet in terms of leveraging capacitive touch, multi-touch recognition, gestures, swiping, pinching, scrolling, that kind of thing. But just one small example in terms of user experience and why that automotive context always needs to be there. And we think we're pretty good at bringing that automotive context. So when you flick on a smartphone or a tablet, you're scrolling through and you flick, you get inertial spinning, right? And so that list will continue to roll and gradually slow down. Well, if you imagine in a vehicle context, a vehicle environment, that's really not what you want, right? You want to have a quick response. You want to be able to get what you need in terms of either information or control, and then get your eyes back on your road and the hands on your wheel, for now, until we get autonomous vehicles, for instance. But so within the Sync 3 context, when you flick, you only go one page, right? And so you don't have this continuous scrolling, you don't have this distraction. The other thing is we want to deliver a complete experience within the vehicle. And so certainly we want to leverage, again, the devices that folks bring into the vehicle, but we want to deliver a Ford and or a Lincoln experience. And we think We're pretty good at doing that. We can always get better. We can always get better in terms of things like user experience, as Tom was referring to, and learning from Silicon Valley, and how do you design experiences? How do you begin to move from features and functions and services to experiences? But we believe that we bring a certain amount of knowledge and insight around the vehicle operating context that I think is irreplaceable. And we work quite cooperatively with CarPlay, Apple, and with Google Android Auto, and those are on the roadmap for Sync 3, and so we'll be compatible with those as we go forward in the future. And we want to give consumers the choice, right? We don't want them to restrict which vehicle they might consider based on which smartphone they might happen to have, but we do believe that from a Ford perspective, we need to control that total user experience.
Tom, as a provider for so many OEMs out there, does the inclusion or the existence of Apple CarPlay and Google's Android Auto make your life easier, or does it make it more complicated at this point?
Yeah, the answer is both, right? So I think, as Don said, there's not a single solution in the user. There's a lot of different needs in the user base. So you have to be able to provide all of those. And to a great extent, that makes our life more and more complicated. So the more that we have to interface into the vehicle makes it a little bit more difficult. But it kind of goes back to your question on the data rate charges. I think the answer to that question is, are people willing to not have the experience they can have external in the vehicle? And if the answer is you're willing to not carry that experience forward, then you won't pay for the data time. But I think over time, everyone is going to understand they want to extend that experience in the rest of their life through the vehicle. So I think the answer is inevitably that people want to have a ubiquitous experience through wherever you can go. So they're going to pay for the data minutes. They're going to need to have the experiences that they're most comfortable with, and they're most comfortable with the Apple experience, then they have to provide that Apple experience. But if they're most comfortable with their own experiences, they want to personalize it, they want to do whatever, you have to offer that to the user. And there certainly isn't going to be one answer for the billions of consumers out there. But even to extend, I think, on Don's point, Mark Field said yesterday, I think 4.8 billion cell phones in the world, right? When you have a market size of 4.8 billion, that's what you're optimizing against. These guys have a large market, but it's not 4.8 billion vehicles. And what we, as partners, have to do is optimize for that application. And we're not really trying to optimize for the 4.8 billion. We're trying to optimize for the audience that we have and do it as effective as we can to give that experience really to what's best in the vehicle by bringing some of that functionality in, but maybe not overwhelming it with everything.
But by embracing these mobile providers, whether it be Apple or Google or somebody else, don't you have more of an opportunity to tap into that 4.8 billion? Does that become a selling point to somebody who has an iPhone, for example? And how valuable is that versus handing over the boutique, discrete control over your entire interior, basically?
I think it's going to be an evolving situation, and it's interesting because one of the other things that we've learned from Silicon Valley is this notion of co-opetition, right? Samsung and Apple are fierce competitors, but Samsung is also a major supplier to Apple, right? And so we're cooperating again with Apple and Google in terms of implementing CarPlay and implementing Android Auto, and want to enable our users to have the best experience inside the vehicle. And yes, I hope that Ford vehicles are attractive because they're going to be CarPlay compatible and because they're going to be Android Auto compatible. But I hope what consumers remember is that Ford was responsible for delivering that total experience.
I would just add to that as well that we're beginning to hit this crossroad point where automakers traditionally developed what you had in the vehicle exclusively with Tier 1 community, and it was a very closed environment in terms of you wrote a spec, you worked on the user experience, you implemented it, validated it, and got it out there. What this is acknowledging, you've got this slide up here, and we're all in the same boat, right? We've got a Chevy Spark out in our booth that's got Android Auto and CarPlay in the same vehicle. You can unplug one phone, plug the other one in, and it's not about necessarily certainly there's been discussions about, is this kind of ceding a portion of the cockpit over to these guys? We don't really see it that way. This is something where it's an acknowledgement that there's an application ecosystem out there that we can leverage as an industry, and we're still going to be responsible, as Don pointed out earlier. You know, you still have to make sure it's not distracting. You still have to make sure it's a world-class experience. People still have to do other things like control climate and do the other things that you've got to do in a vehicle. And yes, there is this one window of kind of into this world of smartphones that, you know, that you're going to have this view into. But, you know, we're of course working with them to do this the proper way and making sure that it's done with distraction in mind, you know, minimizing distraction and making sure that it's an experience that our customers are going to value. That's really what it comes down to.
Jeff, we're seeing, of course, a big focus on distracted driving right now, which is really important, and obviously it's great to see that the industry is getting behind it. It's great to see Google's getting behind it. Great to see that Apple is really focusing on that as well. But we're also seeing a shift away from tactility toward touch interfaces. And in a lot of ways, that actually is a step backwards because it's harder to interact with a touch interface, of course, while you're driving because you can't feel anything. Voice is helping out a lot, helping to fill in that gap. But are there other solutions that we can look forward to, whether it be you know, gestures in midair, that kind of thing, that might also help us in the future of interacting with these smart solutions without having to take our eyes off the road?
Yeah, I think gesture recognition, voice recognition are out there, and we're certainly working on them. Most companies now have some form of gesture recognition. Is the consumer ready for that yet? We're not sure yet, right? But we're developing it. We're getting ready. We've got a couple test cases for that. But I think on the displays themselves, and you're right, touchscreen typically don't have feedback, but you know, we're showing, and you know, it's readily available now. Haptic feedback, not just a touchscreen with a capacitive, you know, but you can actually scroll and you can hit. It has the haptic feedback that a natural button would have. And I think you're starting to see more and more of those because it does in fact help you do this while keeping your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel. Also, obviously, wheel controls has been a big help in this. But I think really the thing is we've got to do it in a non-distracting way. All this technology coming in, if it's not done safely, is really going to create problems. But there's other things you can do with some of our advanced driver assistance. Just a phone call itself. You know, there's one out of 3 drivers today say they're texting or reading emails while they're driving. You know, it's going on in the car today. The challenge that we have as an industry is to make it more safe. It's still going to happen. You can tell people to wear seatbelts. You can tell them not to text. They still don't wear seatbelts. They still don't listen even to the laws. So we're going to find ways to do it. Some of the new display technology can help. But you know, when you look at some of the active safety, when there's a pending event that says, hey, the driver really has to be focused, you can do things in the car. You can stop phone calls, not disconnect, but just put them into a hold. You can do some things to bring the driver's attention back to the driving task that they have to focus on. And I think that's one of the things that we're looking at is the best way to do that, to enable this functionality. And to the point of, are they willing to pay for it? They're willing to pay for functionality. And if minutes is part of that, then they'll pay for it.
And convenience, too.
Yeah.
We're going to start taking questions shortly, so if you have any, please feel free to make your way to the mics, and I'll call you at that point. But again, we got a mic there and a mic there, so if you have a question, feel free to stand up and get in line. So a lot of this, of course, when it comes to distracted driving, you've got to incentivize people to put the phone down. And so CarPlay and Android Auto do a really good job of that because they give you a lot of that functionality, but you have to disable your phone and enable to do that. If you're not relying on the mobile phone to do that, how do you provide that same incentivization to the driver to put the phone down?
I think you provide that experience to, you know, in a different way than having the phone in their hand. I mean, they're going to want the information. And you know, for us, it's just about providing it in a different way, whether it's haptic feedback to avoid them having their cell phone, embedded devices. There's a lot of different technologies out there that we're working on to try and enable that. But if you can keep them still getting the content, still getting the experience and the functions that they want, but not having their hand held in their hand, that's really the important thing.
I think we've really done that as an industry, starting with hands-free calling, right? We've been able to enable, you know, this device doesn't have to be in your hand. It's been years now, many years, of Bluetooth connection, voice dialing, contact upload, hands-free communication. And, you know, that simple use case, which was very difficult back in, you know, 5 to 7 years ago, has now become, you know, a mainstream feature. And more has been added to that, which allow you to kind of keep this in your purse or pocket and drive. So we have to continue to do that as an industry, work on those kinds of things to encourage that kind of that behavior, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road.
Yeah, I think to emphasize that point, if it's as easy to do and it's simplified to the point where it's as easy, you're going to put the phone down. If you can enable the vehicle to do it as seamlessly as you can do it on the phone, then there's no need for it. And that's, I think, where the technology's gone. And we made some big strides in doing that.
Right.
But if you look back, what Apple really taught everybody was you have to accomplish that. And it took some time to accomplish that. And I think the industry's now just got to the point where they're able to do that, so you no longer have to do that.
Well,
and the same thing with voice. Right?
Right.
The initial voice systems were difficult to use, but the advancements in voice now are going to inherently mean that you're going to have a lot more utilization of that because it's not as irritating as it was in the past. It's a much better experience.
I think difficult to use is putting it very kindly.
I would agree with the point of making it as easy to use and, in fact, enhancing the experience. So with a feature like AppLink, for instance, you can voice enable applications that wouldn't normally have been voice enabled. As we like to say, before there was Siri, there was Sync.
Very, very catchy.
And for us, just to finish that thought, I know we want to get to questions, but we've with the OnStar experience for 18 years, it's been a one-touch talking to a live person. That's the ultimate hands-free experience, right? You can have a conversation. I need to go here. We do that hundreds of thousands of times.
So
a day,
before there was Sync, there was OnStar. That's what you're saying.
Before there was Sync, there was OnStar. I'm just trying to one-up Don. That's all. I'm just
Looks like we have a question.
My question is specifically in relation to head-up displays. We are seeing both aftermarket products as well as OEMs and tier 1 suppliers talking about head-up displays. Do you think the market is ready because they offer value in terms of distraction-free experience and especially in terms of integration with smartphones? But what's your sense? How soon do you think they will become mainstream?
That's a great question. So basically the question is the market ready for heads-up displays and what are the concerns there when it comes to distracted driving? That's a very good question. Who would like to take it?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead.
No. Just our feedback. All the data says that absolutely the market's ready for it. It wants it, right? The user experience with heads-up display is very positive. So the fact that the user experience is enhanced and they want it means that I think there's going to be a demand pull through it. So I don't think there's any question that the consumer enjoys that experience and would like to see more of it.
We're starting to see a big increase in interest from our customers, but also in studies that we've done, and not just for the convenience features that we're talking about, but for the safety. As you think about automated driving, you have to be prepared that the vehicle is going to take over. You have to make sure that the driver is comfortable that that vehicle sees what they see. And through augmented reality and some other heads-up display technology, we can begin to show what the vehicle sees. And also, one of the challenges for automated driving is when you bring the vehicle back under the control of the driver, you got to tell them why you're bringing them back in, what information they need, and what the task is that they have to achieve very quickly. And that heads-up display is one of the key technologies and enablers for this.
Great. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of the companies are doing, you mentioned Tesla a few times, doing the over-the-air updates. Do you think in terms of monetizing going forward that consumers will be willing to pay for new applications to be on their cars, to have a more customized heads-up display or those kind of things?
So could we see some sort of an app store or some kind of a marketplace build up within the car where people are making premium updates to their cars, perhaps downloadable horn tones, for example?
I mean, I think we'd be open to that in terms of, if there's enough value in terms of what that enhancement is, might consumers be willing to pay for that? Principally, at least in terms of how we're initially thinking about it, it's just similar to the updates in smartphones, for instance, just continuing to add more and more capability. I wouldn't preclude that, but initially our focus from a Ford standpoint is just on how do we continue to enhance what's there and just make that experience better and better and better. And the ultimate payoff, hopefully, is that they come back to Ford again when it's time to buy or purchase a new vehicle.
I just saw a study in some of the news bites from CES, and they talked about 13 versus 14. And 13 versus 14, with normal web browsing and normal web content, it was 1, 2, 3% increase year over year. But application-based, app-based web browsing and getting data and content through apps was 50 times more. So I think eventually those apps have to come into the car because that's where people are getting their content. Yeah. And I think the challenge is to do it safely.
We're definitely seeing those apps, but by and large, those apps are free at this point. The idea of a premium app store for the car doesn't really exist yet. It seems like it's a good opportunity for somebody. You guys can take that back. Any other questions in the audience? We've still got a couple minutes. Oh, yes, all right.
This question is to the two OEM members. When we look at passive safety, the development of ABS in the 70s, this was a topic that took a long time for the public to understand how to even use ABS brakes. You're talking about a technology now that perhaps for younger users for the cell phone, it's pretty easy to get in and use the applications. what type of activities are the OEMs doing along with the dealers to ensure that the public is aware and understanding the value of these technologies that are being put into the vehicles?
So basically the question is how do you educate consumers about how to use this technology? And Don, I know that was something that was a challenge for My Ford Touch when that first rolled out. There were some issues in dealerships there. And I know that Sync has definitely simplified things by rolling in a lot of that functionality, the new Sync, that is Sync 3. What have you learned from that, and how are you kind of continuing to build on that to educate your new consumers?
So you really have to look at it in a multifaceted way and leverage all the channels that are at your disposal in terms of communicating and interacting with customers. And so whether it's working with our dealers and making sure that they, first of all, understand and then are able to communicate, having technology experts within the dealership that can kind of specialize in that and sort of be the trusted guardians within the dealership in terms of conveying that kind of information, connecting directly to consumers via the web or via mobile, for instance, and having the ability for them to access information when they need it, developing what we call video snacks that are really easily digestible, like short little snippets that go through features and detail how to use them. But ultimately, we want it to be intuitive and simple, and just like you pull out your smartphone and you start using it, you get in your vehicle, and Sync 3 is so simple, intuitive, easy to understand, you just begin to use it and you adapt to it. But you have to take advantage of all the channels and communicate through all the channels, but make sure your customers can reach back out to you and monitor forums and making sure that you're understanding what are some of the key issues that are happening and jumping on those when they're identified in an early way. But it's a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, I would echo that. Certainly starting with an intuitive interface, making it easy to use is the first step, right? What we've also done in the area of like OnStar, we have a button press. When a customer buys a car, they touch the button the first time. We call that a welcome call. So it's an opportunity for us to have a dialogue with the customer, maybe isn't familiar with some of the technology, to say, hey, let's take a couple minutes. We'll just take you through what this looks like. And if you ever have any other questions later, press the button again, we can answer them. And of course, we offer the websites and we offer the other means to do it. But at the end of the day, the model is it's just got to work, right? We're recognizing that the people buying cars aren't always tech savvy folks. They're just wanting to go from point A to point B. They bought the car for a number of reasons. A lot of times we find people with children or grandchildren are getting them more acquainted with the technology. And we had recently a grandmother bought a vehicle, had Wi-Fi in it. She didn't even know what Wi-Fi did. And her grandson got in the car and had a tablet and said, hey, you've got this Wi-Fi hotspot in here, and he logged in and he started using it, and
he probably used up all grandma's data.
She became a customer,
quickly.
right? So it's an interesting dialogue that we have with customers about how we do it. But again, it's about making it intuitive and easy to use right out of the gate.
All right, we have time for one more quick question.
Do you think things like IQS from JD Power are limiting innovation?
Do things like IQS from JD Power limit innovation?
I mean, I would say no. We certainly leverage JD Power as one of the independent third-party resources to help us understand customer feedback and customer input. But again, if I think about the Silicon Valley context, you're kind of oriented towards smart risks and oriented towards continuing to advance technology. And we've received criticism from My Ford Touch. One of the things that I would say, and we talk about making things simple, if you look at all the functionality that's available through that graphical touch display, and even more so with Sync 3, if you had to replicate that with hard buttons, hard controls, and discrete inputs, it would be massively complex. There'd be no way that you'd have a vehicle that was easily usable. So it is, in fact, a simpler way to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish in the vehicle. Now, have we made some smarter decisions about turning the volume control back to a manual knob and making sure that that's something that's easy to do? Yeah, some smart decisions like that. But broadly, in terms of touch controls, and it's interesting to see some of our fellow OEMs maybe moving in that direction as well, I think it's a simpler way of interacting with all the capability that's particularly in infotainment systems in the vehicle.
Great. I think we need to wrap things up there. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, and I hope you all enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good job. Thanks, Tim.
Good job, buddy.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it, as always.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Excellent.
Good moderator. Good. I'm sorry. I'm really late for a meeting.